Imagine taking a job that is, supposed to just comfortably cap off this legendary, 50-year acting career, right?
Yeah, a real victory lap.
Exactly. Only to wake up one morning and find that your own director is publicly condemning you. And meanwhile, there's this army of internet commentators actively accusing you of literal spiritual warfare.
Which is just a wild situation to find yourself in.
Right. I mean, you thought you were just memorizing lines to play a fictional wizard, and suddenly, boom, you're the focal point of this incredibly dangerous, highly publicized ideological purity test in Hollywood.
It really is.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today for you, the listener, is mapping out this fierce collision between art, personal ethics, and just the absolute hyperpolarization of modern politics.
We're really getting into how the simple act of signing a casting contract has evolved. It's not a career milestone anymore. It's a high-stakes cultural battleground.
It's totally changed, and it's a radical shift in how we consume and evaluate media, right?
Oh, absolutely. The old model where, an actor just performed a role and the audience simply consumed the entertainment that's entirely dismantled.
Completely gone.
Yeah, we are now in an era where literally every casting announcement is subjected to this forensic political analysis by multiple highly organized factions.
And to really understand the mechanics of how these factions operate, we have to look closely at the primary sources that are fueling the outrage today.
Right, the actual text.
Yeah. So the stack of materials we're analyzing gives us this fascinating look into a very specific media ecosystem. We are examining an article from an independent, reader-supported outlet called Fandom Pulse.
Written by John F. Trent, right?
Yes, exactly. But we also have a secondary source that layers on top of it, which is a transcript of a YouTube video from a channel called The Trent Report.
Which is the exact same author.
Right. It's the same guy providing his own extended on-camera video commentary regarding the very article he just wrote.
Which is just a brilliant window into modern digital journalism, honestly.
How so?
Well, you have the written text, which functions as the initial dispatch, right? And then you have the video commentary, which acts as the ideological and for the audience.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, it shows how modern commentators, they don't just report the news anymore. They actively instruct their audience on how to feel.
That makes a lot of sense. But before we even get to the text of the article, we need to talk about the wrapper it comes in.
The context is everything.
It really is.
Yeah.
I want to point out this highly revealing detail right on the page. So, embedded within the Fandom Pulse article is an advertisement for a sci-fi book called Space Fleet Academy, Year 1.
Okay.
And the marketing copy pitches this book as, quote, the bold, unapologetic sci-fi epic that's the real answer to woke Starfleet Academy nonsense.
Wow. Subtle.
Right. It goes on to promise a story that actually respects heroism and exploration for readers who are tired of sanitized reboots.
So that advertisement is essentially a decoder ring for the entire publication, Yeah, it immediately establishes the geographical coordinates for where Fandom Pulse sits on the cultural map.
Let me stop you there, though.
Yeah.
Why does a book ad matter so much to our analysis of an article about a casting contract? I mean, websites run algorithmic ads all the time, right?
Sure, but in these independent niche media ecosystems, advertisements are rarely random. They are deeply curated to reflect the core values of the readership.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So the existence of this thriving sub-industry of explicitly anti-woke science fiction publishing that tells us that this audience feels deeply alienated by mainstream legacy media.
Right. They feel left behind.
Exactly. They believe major studios and publishers have just abandoned traditional storytelling in favor of progressive political messaging.
Okay, I track that.
So when this outlet reports on mainstream Hollywood, they're doing so from a baseline assumption of deep distrust and really inherent antagonism toward the entertainment establishment.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It frames the lens completely.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a critical procedural step for this deep dive.
Yes, very important ground rules here.
Right. Our goal today isn't to tell you who is right or who is wrong in this intensely heated debate. Our job is to map the battlefield so you can see exactly how these cultural arguments are constructed, weaponized and deployed.
Because the sources we're examining contain passionate, highly polarized arguments from both the political left and the political right.
Very passionate.
Yeah, they touch on transgender rights, fundamental religious doctrines, concepts of biological sex, and, of course, the public statements of J.K. Rowling.
And because we are looking at primary documents originating from the literal front lines of this culture war, it is vital to be transparent with you, the listener. We are not taking sides.
Not at all.
We're absolutely not endorsing the viewpoints. We're not validating the left-wing criticisms, and we are not validating the right-wing commentary or religious arguments presented in these texts.
We are simply acting as impartial analysts. We're breaking down the linguistic rhetoric and the structural logic of the materials provided.
Exactly. We are dissecting the machinery of the controversy, not joining the protest.
Well said.
So, with that framework firmly in place, okay, let's unpack this. The central figure caught in the crossfire here is the legendary actor John Lithgow.
And the catalyst is his casting as Albus Dumbledore in the upcoming HBO Harry Potter television.
Right. And to understand why this exploded the way it did, we have to trace the timeline of Lithgow's own psychological journey, starting about a year before the controversy reached its boiling.
We really have to look at April 2025. This is when Lithgow first publicly addressed the early rumblings from activists who were, suggesting he should decline.
And his mindset back then, it was rooted in a completely different era of Hollywood logic.
Oh, completely.
He spoke to the Times in the UK and framed the Dumbledore role as this deeply pragmatic career-capping move.
He called it an 8-year commitment, right?
Hey, an 8-year commitment. And I mean, for a man in his late 70s, an 8-year television contract isn't just a job. It is the final major chapter of his professional life.
Yeah, it's massive.
He explicitly called it a winding down role and noted he was, quote, just thinking about mortality.
What's fascinating here is how he approaches the role through this purely professional, almost blue-collar act,
Totally.
He's evaluating the job based on stability, prestige, and he seems to have completely underestimated the gravitational pull of the cultural palette surrounding the Harry Potter property.
I'm not sure he just underestimated it, honestly. I think he thought he was immune.
Really?
Yeah, because when the interviewer asked if the initial backlash had deterred him, his response was, quote, oh, heavens no.
Wow. Brushed it off.
He even expressed this mild, almost academic curiosity about J.K. Rowling. He said he wondered how she had absorbed the controversy and added, I suppose at a certain point I'll meet her and I'm curious to talk.
It's the perspective of an actor who came of age in an era where the separation of art and art is just a foundation.
Right. It's just how things work.
In the 20th century, an actor's primary responsibility was to the text, and the personal politics of the screenwriter or the novelist are secondary, if not entirely irrelevant, to the daily work on a soundstage.
And Lithgow was operating on the assumption that those old boundaries still held firm.
But our sources map this brutal escalation that proves those boundaries.
Yeah, they are completely obliterated. Fast forward to February 2026. The tone in his press appearances shifts dramatically.
It's a huge pivot.
He tells The Hollywood Reporter that the active vocal insistence that he walk away from the job has made him uncomfortable.
The controversy has officially breached the perimeter of his profession.
It really has.
Yeah.
And then the hammer drops in March 2026. A major feature in the New York Times reports that Lithgow was actually stung by the critics.
Stung. That's a strong word.
That word, stung, implies a genuine, visceral, emotional toll. The reporting reveals he actually contemplated quitting the series altogether. Ultimately, he decided to stay, but the Times noted he accepted with resignation that this controversy is going to come up in every single interview for the rest of his life.
He's coming to terms with the reality of the modern ideological tax.
The ideological tax. I like that phrase.
Yeah. The role of Dumbledore no longer just requires him to memorize spells, It requires him to navigate a permanent state of public relations crisis management.
Let me throw an analogy at this to help visualize the whiplash you must be feeling.
Let's hear it.
It's like stepping onto what you think is a traditional theatrical stage. You've rehearsed your lines, you know you're blocking right.
Right.
But halfway through the first act, the stage lights snap on, the doors lock, and you realize the stage is actually a political debate podium.
Oh.
And the audience isn't there to watch a play. They are standing up, demanding that you deliver a partisan speech on the most sensitive issues of the day. How does an actor trained in the craft of illusion reconcile being forced into the reality of a culture war?
They often can't, because the skill sets are entirely opposed.
Yeah, they really are.
Acting is about empathy and inhabiting diverse perspectives. Participating in a highly polarized culture war demands rigid ideological conformity and the complete rejection of opposing perspectives.
Which brings us to the actual source of the criticism that managed to pierce his armor.
Right, where is this coming from?
It wasn't random anonymous accounts on social media that made him contemplate quitting. The criticism that stunned him came from inside his own professional house.
Ah.
And this introduces the pushback from the political left. The source of the most painful backlash was his colleagues on an independent film called Jimpa.
The contrasting dynamics between these two projects, Jimpa and Harry Potter, are so crucial for understanding the modern...
Let's break down the Jimpa dynamic. According to our sources in this indie film, Lithgow plays a gay man named Jim Hyde.
Okay.
And he is acting alongside a performer named Odd Mason Hyde, who plays his non-binary grandchild in the movie. So you have Lithgow actively utilizing his talent to participate in a project that explicitly centers explores and affirms LGBTQ plus identities, specifically non-binary identities.
Right. He's operating within an independent film ecosystem that typically places a very high premium on ideological alignment between the artists and the themes of the work.
It's very values-driven.
Exactly. In modern indie spaces, the expectation is often that the cast and crew actually share the political and social values screen.
And it is precisely that co-star, Ode Mason, who goes on the record to criticize his casting as Dumbledore.
The irony.
Yeah. The source material cites an interview Mason Hyde gave to the LGBTQ plus outlet Out magazine. Let's look at the specific language they use.
Mason Hyde called Lithgow's casting, quote, definitely a difficult moment in time.
Okay.
They stated, I don't think it's worth speaking to John's reasoning by any means, but I do also think that it's a strain for sure. And they concluded by saying, and also I found it disconcerting.
Disconcerting. I want to linger on that word because it carries a lot of weight.
It really does.
It implies a sense of profound dissonance, like an unspoken contract being violated.
It speaks directly to the feeling of betrayal. From the perspective of his co-star, Lithgow just spent weeks or months acting as a supportive, affirming figure in a queer narrative.
Right.
To immediately follow that up by joining a massive franchise whose creator is widely viewed by queer advocates as a direct threat that creates severe cognitive dissonance for the people who work.
But the public pressure didn't stop with the co-star. The director of Jinripa, Sophie Hyde, also stepped into the fray.
She got involved too.
She did. And our sources reveal she didn't just give an interview after the fact. She took immediate, direct action. She stated that as soon as the Harry Potter casting news broke, she personally contacted Lithgow to confront him about it.
Wow, this illustrates the complete collapse of professional distance.
Seriously.
A director calling a veteran actor to interrogate his subsequent career choices on moral grounds that represents a massive shift in industry norm.
And I really want to interrogate the core of Sophie Hyde's argument to Out magazine because it perfectly encapsulates how the rules of engagement have changed.
Okay, what did she say?
She makes a very specific distinction. She says her issue is, quote, not that J.K. Rowling has opinion, which is one thing, but that she has a very vocal platform and she's funding a very, very harmful legal battle against trans people, and that funding is doing a great deal of harm.
This raises an important question about the evolving definition of complicity.
How so?
Hyde is actively moving the goalposts of the cultural debate. She's trying to shift the conversation away from the abstract realm of free speech or differing opinions and anchor it in the realm of material, quantifiable harm.
Right, but let's dig into the actual mechanics of that argument. How does taking an acting job equate to causing material harm? What is the logical chain being built?
Well, the logic operates on the concept of economic supply chain.
Okay, walk me through that.
The argument is that by working for the Harry Potter franchise, an actor generates cultural relevance and financial value for that intellectual property.
Sure.
That value ultimately enriches J.K. Rowling. Rowling then takes those financial resources and uses them to fund legal battles or political advocacy that actively damage the rights and lives of trans. Therefore, by generating value for the franchise, the actor becomes an active participant in the downstream harm.
It's the death of the neutral gig.
Yeah.
You aren't just an employee trading labor for a paycheck anymore. You're a cog in a machine that produces an ideological outcome.
Exactly.
And that creates an impossible bind for Lithgow, which Sophie Hyde actually names out loud. She acknowledges that Lithgow is a deeply empathetic person who supports the famed Jinpa and believes in trans rights.
She identifies what I'd call the empathy paradox.
The empathy paradox, I like that.
Yeah, how does a person who supports a marginalized community justify enriching a system that the community views as its primary antagonist? For the progressive critics cited in our source, separating the art from the artist is no longer an intellectual luxury. It is viewed as a moral failure. To them, taking the HBO job is a direct betrayal of the values Lithgow embodied on the Jinpa.
So that is the immense localized pressure coming from the political left. They want him to resign because they view his participation as funding and normalizing material harm against a vulnerable population.
Right.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting. Let's pivot to the YouTube transcript from the Trent Report, which represents the conservative media reaction.
This is where the landscape becomes truly surreal.
You would logically assume that if the progressive left is attacking Lithgow, the conservative right might rush to his defense, or at least champion his right to work on the franchise.
That's the standard binary of the culture war, usually.
Exactly. But the conservative YouTube host also thinks John Lithgow should quit the role.
Wait, really?
Yes, he just wants him to quit for the exact diametrically opposite reason.
It is a perfect mirror image of Out. The desired outcome is identical his resignation, but the underlying motivation accusations are utterly inverted.
Let's break down the YouTuber's rhetoric neutrally, because his logic reveals a deep anxiety about cultural infiltration. The YouTuber points to Lithgow's support for his Jimpa colleagues and concludes that Lithgow is essentially a progressive Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse? Wow.
He argues that Lithgow will use the massive global platform of the Dumbledore role to legitimize and push what the YouTuber terms so-called trans rights and transgender ideology.
The YouTuber is viewing the casting through the lens of ideological. In his view, J.K. Rowling is engaged in a vital cultural effort to stamp out transgender. He therefore sees it as a massive strategic vulnerability to allow an actor who sympathizes with that ideology to inhabit one of Rowling's most beloved characters.
Yes, the YouTuber is completely baffled by the business. Yeah. He says in the transcript, if I was J.K. Rowling, I would say absolutely not. He argues that if she genuinely cares about stopping this ideology, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to hire Lithgow and amplify his fame. But I want to focus on a specific rhetorical tactic the YouTuber uses when he directly addresses Sophie Hyde's accusation of harm.
This is a crucial moment of media analysis, right?
The YouTuber reads Hyde's quote where she claims Rowling's funding is doing a great deal of harm, and his immediate response is to accuse the left of projecting.
Of course.
He says that's just absolutely ridiculous. They literally invert the actual truth, right?
The strategy of inverting the truth is incredibly common in these hyper-polarized digital...
How does that work?
Well, social media algorithms heavily incentivize taking your opponent's strongest moral vocabulary in this case, the concept of preventing harm and just flipping it back.
I see. So instead of defending against the charge of harm, you accuse the accuser of being the true source of harm. And the YouTuber does this using visceral, highly charged language. And again, reminding you, the listener, we are impartially reporting the claims from the source. We are not validating.
Right, just reading the text.
The YouTuber claims that it is the transgender movement itself that is causing actual harm to individuals. He uses aggressive terms, stating that transitioning results in physical mutilation and leads to spiritual and mental suffering.
He is radically reframing J.K. Rowling's role here. He isn't just defending her right to have an opinion. He is framing her as an active protector against societal destruction.
And he attempts to anchor this narrative by citing alleged real-world incidents.
What kind of incidents?
Well, the transcript shows him referencing a controversial case in Loudoun County, Virginia, claiming a boy pretending to be a girl committed crimes against female students.
Okay.
But then he broadens the scope dramatically. He claims this kind of threat is happening in jails across the West, which he specifically refers to as the former territory of Christendom.
Oh, wow. That phrase, the former territory of Christendom, that is the skeleton key that unlocks the underlying ideology of the entire video.
It completely shifts the scale of the argument, doesn't it?
Yep.
It's not just about a high school bathroom policy.
Exactly. It reveals that for this commentator, the debate over transgender identity isn't primarily a debate about civil rights, medical science, or even biological definitions.
What is it then?
It is fundamentally a theological and civilizational battle. He views the acceptance of modern gender theory as a symptom of civilization and a direct departure from divine order.
Which perfectly sets up the heavy theological layer that the Fandom Pulse article provides.
Right. The written.
Yes, the article includes a substantial quote from Bishop Michael Burbidge of the Diocese of Arlington to establish a formal religious framework for their opposition. Can you unpack the theology the bishop has presented?
Sure. The bishop's quote is grounded in a very strict traditional Catholic theological framework, specifically what is often referred to as the theology.
Okay, I've heard of that.
The core assertion he makes that claiming to be transgender or desiring to transition rests on a mistaken view, and crucially, that it rejects the body.
I'm struggling with how deeply found. Rejects the body as a gift from God.
Yeah.
If you accept that premise, then the entire progressive framework of self-determination completely collapses.
That is precisely the point. If you believe the physical body is an intentional divine gift designed by a creator, then actively altering it or denying its biological reality is not viewed as an exercise in personal freedom.
Right.
It is viewed as a rebellion against the divine will. It is seen as rejecting the gift.
And the bishop outlines how this theology dictates the way believers must interact with transgender individuals. He states that affirming someone in an identity that contradicts their biological sex is to mislead that person and involves speaking and interacting with that person in an untruthful manner.
It's a very hard one.
He does mention the law of gradual, the idea of patiently guiding someone toward the truth over time. But he draws a hard line, stating that in no circumstances can we confirm a person in error.
This fundamentally redefines the concept of empathy.
How so?
Well, in the progressive framework used by the Jimpa cast, empathy requires affirming a person's self-declared identity. But in the theological framework presented by the bishop, affirming that identity is an act of spiritual deception.
Well, wow.
True empathy, in this view, requires denying the transition in order to guide the person back to divine truth.
So, from the perspective of the right-wing audience reading this article, John Lithgow's support for his non-binary co-star isn't seen as kindness or tolerance.
Not at all.
It is seen as active participation in a profound spiritual and biological lie. And that explains the staggering level of vitriol in the comments section of the fandom Pulsar.
The audience reactions provide a direct read on the temperature of this specific meeting, and the temperature is just absolute hostility.
They show absolutely zero grace for Lithgow's inner turmoil. When the New York Times reports that he is unhappy and stung, the commenters don't see a complex moral dilemma. They see an actor trying to manipulate public perception.
Right.
One commenter completely dismisses his distress as, quote, performative outrage.
They believe he's playing a cynical double, feigning sympathy for the progressive left to protect his industry reputation while greedily securing the massive HBO page.
The imagery the commenters use is incredibly aggressive. One accuses him of waving one hand angrily in the air to distract the public, while the other hand accepts the bag of money under the table.
Yay.
Another comment mocks him for showing his yellow-stained belly for his real mastermind. They argue that they would actually respect him more if he firmly stood by his progressive principles and quit the show rather than trying to occupy the middle ground.
And the rhetoric directed at transgender activists in these comments mirrors the YouTubers' intent. One commenter states they are tired of transgender activists and explicitly likens them to Nazis.
Which is an astonishing escalation of historical terms.
Truly.
The commenter even acknowledges the rhetorical theft, noting it's the same buzzword that radical leftists like to use on us. It's a complete race to the bottom of the rhetorical barrel.
It really is.
But step back and look at the vice grip John Lithgow is currently trapped in. On his left, his indie film director is calling his phone, accusing him of funding material harm against a vulnerable minority.
Right.
On his right, a mobilized army of commentators and religious figures is accusing him of pushing spiritual wickedness, mutilation, and being a cowardly hypocrite.
Yeah.
The sheer volume and intensity of the crossfire is just breathtaking.
It creates an ideological pressure cooker where neutrality is impossible.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether he stays on the show or quits, he is viewed as committing a grievous moral sin by a massive segment of the population.
Which brings us to a fascinating question. How is Lithgow actually trying to survive? What is his defense strategy? Let's circle back to how he publicly justifies his decision to keep the job, because it relies on a very old, very traditional artistic argument.
He attempts to invoke the classical separation of the text from the author.
Right.
He is trying to build a firewall between the art and the artist.
Exactly. Lithgow points directly to the actual scripts, the books, and the Harry Potter canon itself. He tells The Hollywood Reporter that if you read the canon, you see absolutely no trace of transphobic sensibility.
Interesting defense.
He goes on to praise the work as a great meditation on kindness and empathy and acceptance.
He is arguing that the intrinsic value of the art remains pure, regardless of the extrinsic political controversies surrounding the creator.
And because he views the actual art as a profound meditation on kindness, he looks at J.K. Rowling's current, highly polarized public views and finds them, in his own words, ironic and somewhat inexplicable.
Right.
He basically says, she wrote all this beautiful material about acceptance, so it's baffling to me that she holds these harsh views now.
But that specific word choice, inexplicable, becomes a massive tactical error in the eyes of the right-wing comment.
Oh, the YouTuber completely pounces on it. He attacks Lithgow's use of the word inexplicable with incredible ferocity.
What does he say?
The YouTuber says they are not inexplicable. They are very easily explained. And what is his explanation? He claims that Rowling's views are simply aligned with biological reality, his assertion that human beings are born male or female and cannot change that fact. To the YouTuber, there's no irony at all.
It highlights a complete clash of epistemologies, a clash in how these two men understand reality itself.
Yeah, they aren't even speaking the same language.
Lithgow believes Rowling's views contradict the empathetic core of her art. The YouTuber believes Rowling's views are simply an acknowledgement of basic, undeniable, natural law, and he views Lithgow as the one living in an inexplicable delusion.
But hold on, let me stop you there and push back on the YouTuber's logic.
Go ahead.
He is invoking biological reality to govern the casting of a television show about a magical universe where people turn into cats, fly on brooms, and cast spells with wooden sticks. It seems absurd to demand strict adherence to biological essentialism in a fantasy franchise.
That is a fair critique of the logic, but for the YouTuber, the fantasy elements of the story are completely irrelevant to the culture war.
Really?
Yeah. The battleground isn't the magic. The battleground is the cultural influence of the creator and the actors who represent her brand.
And that leads to perhaps the most surprising twist in the entire source.
This part is wild.
Given how much the YouTuber despises Lithgow and the progressive left, you might assume he is a massive, unwavering champion of J.K. Rowling. You'd think she would be his conservative hero.
But she isn't. And this reveals the incredible nuance and fractioning within these hyper-polarized camps.
The YouTuber actually spends a significant portion of his video critiquing J.K. Rowling herself.
Wait,
Yes. First, he polices her ideological purity by claiming her views have evolved over time. He asserts that when she first began speaking out against the transgender political movement, she still expressed approval of bodily mutilation and sex transition surgeries for certain people. He claims it's only in recent months that she seems to have rejected the concept entirely, though he complains she hasn't specifically clarified her stance.
He's treating her not as a leader, but as a suspect ally who needs to be monitored for ideological backsliding.
And then he gets to the core of his critique of Rowling, which is fascinating. He says at the end of the day, Rowling isn't actually right-wing. She is a feminist, and she's looking at all this stuff through a feminist lens.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a profound observation about the current, very strange state of cultural alliance.
Tell me more.
The YouTuber has correctly identified that J.K. Rowling's opposition to modern transgender ideology is not rooted in traditional conservatism. It is deeply rooted in second-wave feminism.
Let's actually define that for the listener, because feminism means a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah.
How does second-wave feminism clash with modern trans rights? And why does the YouTuber care?
Second-wave feminism, which gained prominence in the 1960s and 70s, focused heavily on securing rights based on biological sex.
Okay.
It fought for the protection of female-only spaces, reproductive rights, and dismantling patriarchal structures. Many adherents of this view argue that biological sex is an immutable reality and that opening female spaces to transgender women undermines the hard-won sex-based rights of biological women.
So it's a strictly secular feminist argument.
Exact.
Right, but the YouTuber's opposition, as we established with the Catholic bishop's quote earlier, is rooted in deeply conservative, patriarchal religious theology. He believes the body is a divine gift, and that altering it is a sin against God.
Exact. These are fundamentally incompatible worldviews.
They really are.
The radical feminists believe society needs to be liberated from patriarchal control to protect biological women. The religious conservative believes society needs to return to traditional patriarchal divine order.
Wow.
They are philosophical enemies who simply happen to currently share a single common adversary in modern gender.
It's the ultimate enemy of my enemy is my friend scenario.
Yeah.
But the YouTuber makes it incredibly clear that the friendship is highly conditional.
How so?
He deploys this vivid final metaphor to explain how he views Rowling. He says that because she looks at the world through a feminist lens rather than a religious one, she is still a little bit further up the slippery slope.
The slippery slope.
He warns his audience, you don't want to be on the slippery slope whatsoever. You want to be on the ladder that takes you up to heaven, not on the slope that takes you down.
That metaphor flawlessly encapsulates the paradox we've been analyzing. Look at where J.K. Rowling exists within the landscape mapped out by our source. She is occupying the ultimate cultural no-man.
On one flank, she is entirely vilified by the progressive left, represented by the Jinpa director, who views her not just as an ideological opponent, but as a dangerous billionaire funding material harm against a marginalized community.
Right.
On the other flank, she is actively critiqued by the religious right, represented by the YouTuber, who views her as an imperfect, secular feminist who is still fundamentally sliding toward hell because she refuses to submit to their strict theological worldview.
She is far too conservative for the progressives and far too progressive.
And sitting right smack in the middle of that raging, impossible crossfire is John Lithgow, a veteran actor in his late 70s who just wanted to sign a nice, steady 8-year contract to play a wizard, wear a fake beard, and wind down his career in peace.
It is a staggering illustration of how complex and unforgiving cultural terrain.
So what does this all mean? I want to pose that question directly to you, the listener, as we wrap up this analysis. What have we actually uncovered by digging through the mechanics of these incredibly polarized sources?
I think we've uncovered the complete and total collapse.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The idea that a performance exists in a vacuum, completely separate from the political ecosystem surrounding the intellectual property, it's an illusion that can no longer be sustained in the modern era.
Lithgow genuinely tried to navigate this using the old maps, you know.
He really did.
He tried to steer by the kindness and empathy he found in the script, believing he could separate the purity of the art, politics of the artist, but the modern world aggressively let him.
He found himself caught between independent film colleagues who feel deeply personally betrayed by his association with the franchise and right-wing commentators who view his very presence in this show as an infiltrating ideological threat to their world.
And if we bring this home to your everyday life, this phenomenon isn't just restricted to famous actors and billionaire authors.
No, it is a reflection of the water we are all currently swimming in. The combination of information overload and algorithmic hyperpolarization means that the media we consume, the art we enjoy, the companies we buy from, and yes, the jobs we choose to take, are increasingly subjected to intense, uncompromising purity tests from every conceivable angle.
It requires a level of constant, hypervigilant moral calculus that is honestly just exhausting. We are all, in a way, being asked to perform that same calculus Lithgow is struggling with, just on smaller stages in our own lives.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over after this deep dive in. If an 8-year commitment to playing a fictional wizard requires navigating the absolute deepest theological, biological, and sociological debates of our entire era, is it ever truly possible to separate the art from the artist's politics?
Or has that concept simply become a relic of a less connected?
Does every dollar spent, every ticket bought, and every role accepted inherently become a political statement, whether we intended to or not? Can we ever just go back to the magic show, or are the theater lights going to be stuck on high beam forever?
It's a messy, painful process the culture is going through, for sure.
And we hope mapping it out today provided some clarity for you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep analyzing the sources you encounter, and most importantly, keep questioning the world around you.
Until next time.
Take care, everyone.